Welcome to the program. Good to have you with me on this Wednesday night. It's a big night, okay? This is just a big, big night. I have been waiting for 30 years for this day, and I was not surprised, although I was moved. If you have never been to a parole hearing, and most of us never have been, this was something to behold when Susan Smith went before a parole board in South Carolina begging that she be let out of prison after killing her 2 baby boys back in 1994. This is what the begging looked like. Wiping tears, crying, saying it wasn't her. She didn't understand even what she was doing. It was as though maybe the boys would have a better life with Jesus. She said she just didn't know what was happening to her. Big case made for her mental health, which is big today. Would it have been big back then to this jury if we cared about mental health back then? Or would they have just thought this was no different than the time she cried and begged the nation to save her boys from the black man who carjacked them when she had just rolled them into the lake, strapped in their car seats? This was hard to watch. You want to be empathetic. You want to be empathetic. You want to believe that people can get better, be better. You want to believe them when they act like this. But then you remember all the people they hurt. And the person she hurt the most was her husband back then, the father of Michael and Alex, who believed her carjacking baloney, who stood by her for the 9 days that she lied to all of us, and particularly to him. He's here tonight because he was there today. He was there today to pitch his case and says he'll be there every 2 years when parole hearings come up. He's standing by. He's going to speak to me about what it was like to make that case before that parole board and to live through this story again, knowing it's coming every 2 years. David Smith will join me in a moment. I also want to tell you something happened today as we were planning for this very special program. We weren't expecting it, but there's been a decision that's made in Idaho. You may think that the death penalty was already on the table for Bryan Kohberger because the prosecutors said they intended to seek it. But in all the wrangling back and forth over the last many months, his attorneys have put forth motion after motion saying it has to come off the table. It can't be death penalty. Here's why. And here's another reason why. And oh, by the way, here are multiple other reasons why, not the least of which is death row is inhumane. Well, judge made a decision today. Bryan Kohberger will face the death penalty if he's convicted for murdering those 4 kids who were in their beds in their peaceful off-campus home on King Road. It is on the table, or as you might call it, it's on. That's big news today, but I'm going to start here with this massive day. How do you convince somebody that you're really broken up about something, that you're sad or that you're regretful or that you're grieving, when the last time anybody saw you that way, it was all just a big, fat, disgusting lie? That was the challenge for Susan Smith today. One of several challenges at her first ever parole hearing after being locked away for 30 years in South Carolina. The biggest challenge was the act that put her in prison in the first place, let's be frank. The callous and cold-blooded drowning of her 2 little boys, Michael and Alex, simply because she had a boyfriend that her husband didn't know about, and that boyfriend didn't care for kids. Between the night of the murders and the day that Smith finally came clean and confessed 9 days later, she also made a pretty convincing show of grief and despair before the microphones as she begged us all to help her find her babies after insisting that she was carjacked by a black man. Today she gave it her best shot, hoping against hope for 4 votes in her favor. And Susan Smith got 0 votes. This might surprise you. It surprised me. It took that parole board exactly 57 seconds of deliberation. Let me repeat that. It took the parole board 57 seconds to deliberate The South Carolina Parole Board spent less than a minute deciding that Susan Smith is not fit to re-enter our society. I want you to see and hear every word that Smith said to that board remotely by Zoom from her prison. I want you to hear her making excuses for the trouble that she has caused, the pain and suffering that she's caused, and the person she says she's most sorry for. I want you to decide if her remorse is real or if her grief is just as fake as it was back in 1994. She fooled us all back then at 23 years old with her shameless and racist lies about a non-existent carjacker who took her kids. So here, beginning to end, is Susan Smith's parole pitch 30 years later.
Ms. Smith,
yes, ma'am.
What would you like to tell us today?
First of all, I want to say how very sorry I am.
It's okay, Susan. Just talk with us.
I know that what I did was horrible. And I would give anything if I could go back and change it. And I loved Michael and Alice with all my heart.
Ms. Smith, were you under the influence of drugs or alcohol the night that you murdered your children?
No, ma'am, I was not.
Your attorney talked about working with mental health. Is that helpful to you?
Ma'am?
Mr. Thomas,
I hear you.
Mr. Thomas talked about the fact that you were working with mental health, and my question is that helpful to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that something that you would be willing to continue with on the outside if you were granted parole?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Smith, your crime took a lot of resources from the law enforcement community. What, if anything, would you say to the folks who worked so hard to find your children if you had the opportunity to speak to them today?
That I'm sorry that I put them through that. I really, really am. And I'm especially sorry to the drivers that I had to find them. I wish I could take that back. I really do. I didn't lie to get away with it. I really did. I was just scared. I didn't know how I could tell the people that loved them that they would never see them again. I didn't know how I could tell David he couldn't see his sons again. And I'm sorry. I don't know. I know that's not enough. I know it's not, but I don't know. I know they just sound like words, but they come from my heart. They really do.
Right. One of the things that we review is your institutional record, and you've had some infractions throughout the years, some involving the use of some narcotics. Do you have any issues with drugs or alcohol at this point?
I don't. No, ma'am, I don't.
And you had a recent disciplinary infraction just a few months ago. So why should this board think that if we grant you parole that you're going to go out and follow the rules and the laws of society if you do not follow the rules within the institution?
Well, this last infraction, I was trusted the wrong person. This lady contacted me, and I trusted her. I thought she was going to do a documentary on mental health, and I really am not guilty of what they charged me with, and I have filed an appeal on that charge. And as far as your question, I've never been in trouble before, and the things that I have been found guilty of in here have been just stupidity. I know I made a lot of mistakes in here, and I have learned from them. And before this last infraction had been 10 years, because I grew up and I knew that I needed to stop making dumb decisions, and I did. I knew it was time to grow up and do the right thing. I just made a lot of dumb choices and mistakes in here. So I know I've learned from those mistakes.
What do you feel is the most important thing that you've learned while you've been incarcerated?
Ma'am?
What do you think is the most important thing that you have learned while you have been incarcerated?
That people are important, that forgiveness and love, that family is important, and that decisions we make don't just affect us, they affect the people that we love. And not to take things or people for granted.
All right, is there anything else that you would like to tell us today that wasn't in your packet or that has not already been said?
I would just like to say that I am a Christian, and God is a big part of my life, and I know He has forgiven me, and it is by His grace and mercy and I have a lot of faith, and I live by that every day. And I just ask that you show that same kind of mercy as well. And I guess, yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
So you probably saw a man pop up at the beginning urging Smith just talk to us and telling her it's okay. That's her attorney, Tommy Thomas, who was also on the Zoom today. Only 2 other people showed up to support Susan Smith. These 2. The man on the right is a Presbyterian minister. Woman on the left is his wife. That minister says that he's written to Susan weekly the whole time that she's been in prison, which is remarkable. Someone who has not stayed in touch with Susan Smith is this man. Hasn't stayed in touch in any way, shape, or form. This is her ex-husband, David Smith, the father of Michael and Alex, who Susan Smith murdered. He was front and center at this hearing today with his second wife, Tiffany, and their adult daughter, Savannah. And David, too, addressed the board.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, it's been a tough 30 years. I'm not here to speak about what she's done in prison. You all have the records and accounts of all that. I'm just here to advocate on Michael and Alex's behalf and as their father. You know, God gives us free choice. And she made free choice that night to end her life. This wasn't a tragic mistake. It wasn't something that she didn't mean to do. She purposely meant to end her life. I never have felt any remorse from her for it. She never expressed any to me. I never seen it on paper. because you've heard, she changed my life for the rest of my life that night. Some for the better, some for the worse, but what she did, not only to Michael and Alex, she came pretty close to causing me to end my life because of the grief that she brought upon me. But thankfully she didn't. I understand back in 95 that through the state's law, life in prison meant 30 years to life. And now that's different, but at that time, that's what counts. I understand that. But ultimately, to me, that's only 15 years per child. Her own children. It's just not enough. So I'm asking that you please deny her parole today. And hopefully in the future, but specifically today. Not let her out. I miss them very much. And I love them very much. And I will be here every 2 years going forward to ensure that their death doesn't go in vain. Thank you.
If there is any better example that time doesn't always heal all wounds, I haven't seen it. That was such an emotional presentation. It was so hard to watch the pain in David's face. It was shortly after that that the board asked David and all of his family members and supporters who came in to speak or stand on his behalf to exit the room where the panel was. And I told you before, I'll tell you again, 57 seconds after they invited them to leave, they gave their decision, and it was denied. Parole denied. And after that vote, a visibly relieved David Smith spoke to reporters.
I haven't seen any remorse from her. So for her to think that I would even speak on her behalf, I do not understand that. But it's been such a tough 30 years for my family, for friends, loved ones, near and far. But today, the committee made the right decision and denied her parole, at least for another 2 years. So I'm not looking forward to it in 2 more years to go through this again, but at least I know for now she'll still be behind bars. And for 2 more years, there'll still be justice for Michael and Alex.
Justice for Michael and Alex now comes in 2-year increments. Susan Smith's next parole hearing is set for October 2026. And whether or not Susan Smith ever takes a step outside the prison walls again, the sentence that she imposed on David Smith is never going to change. As Michael and Alex's father made painfully clear today, grief is part of his every waking moment. He will never be without it. And he will never stop speaking for those 2 little boys either. David Smith is speaking with me live when we come back. So, while today was all about Susan Smith and whether she'd get sprung from prison after 30 years for killing her 2 young children. We wanted to make tonight more about those 2 children. I'm going to show you some pictures that have never been seen before. These are exclusive photographs that were given to us by the family, by David and Tiffany, his wife. These are pictures of Michael and Alex before they died. They were so incredibly cute. I mean, these are the kind of pictures we can all imagine. This one breaks my heart the most because there's a car seat. But these are all pictures that we have ourselves in our own families. The hospital bed. They're the most profound images that I have seen in this story in such a long time. She had 30 years. She had 30 years to think about what was going to take place today in that hearing, Susan Smith, right? She had 30 years to think of what she might say, how she might act in front of the people who were maybe going to let her out. But she's not the only person who had 30 years to prepare, because David Smith also had 30 years to prepare for this day. David Smith had 30 years to think about, what am I going to say when that first opportunity for her to leave prison comes my way? To be clear, it's not happening. You've heard the news. Denied in 57 seconds. And when Susan Smith comes up for parole again, David Smith will be there again to oppose her. David Smith and his wife, Tiffany, join me now live. Thank you to both of you for taking the time to speak with me. And may I just say, I'm so incredibly sorry, David and Tiffany, for what you went through today, what you're going to be going through every 2 years. It's not as though the last 30 years have been peaceful, but at least you haven't had to do this. David, perhaps start by telling me your reaction to hearing the news fairly quickly that parole was denied.
It was much relief. It was, like they say, lifting the world off my shoulders.
Did you think, David, that there was actually a chance did you think there was a chance she might actually get paroled today?
Slim chance. Not a big chance, but I was worried that it would happen, yeah.
How did you prepare? I noticed you didn't have any remarks written down. You spoke from the heart. You spoke off the cuff. And there's 2 ways to prepare: what you're going to say and how you're going to cope. How did you prepare?
I talked to Michael and Alex a lot beforehand. We had a lot of discussions beforehand.
We're seeing these beautiful pictures again that you've very kindly given to us. Can I ask you, so many people say time heals all wounds, right? But I saw your face today. I saw how painful it was for you to stand up there and speak about the boys and speak about what's happened to you and your family and speak about your grief. What do you say to that notion that some say time heals all wounds?
Maybe it does heal some wounds, but for me, personally, time does not heal the losing of a child. That one, it does not heal.
Are there tougher times? I listened to your sister as she gave her remarks, and she listed the dates: the August birthday, the October birthday, the day that the children lost their lives. She said that her life really collapses every year on those dates.
Yeah. It used to be for me on anniversaries or holidays or just landmark dates, it was really tough. But then it got to where it could be the 8th year, the 12th year, just a random year that got really tough to deal with. So it's up and down all the time.
Do you picture, I'm looking at a picture of you from 30 years ago, and the smile on your face, the smile on both of your faces. Do you picture Michael and Alex as 30-something-year-old men?
I do not. I think about it sometimes. Through the years, I've thought about what they would look like or what they would be, like, have chosen as a career. But in my mind, I always come back to 3 and 14-month-old.
They're just frozen in time in those same pictures that we're looking at. You and Tiffany were married and had Savannah, who is now, I think, in her 30s, or at least close to it, probably late 20s. She was there today. She spoke beautifully about the brothers that she never knew and the life that she was robbed of having with them. Tell me a little bit about, and actually, Tiffany, I'll get you to jump in here, about Savannah and how she's processed everything that her dad has gone through, and then, by extension, what you've gone through.
Yes, Savannah is 23, and she has, she learned bits and pieces over the years. We didn't give it to her all at once, the information about what happened to her brothers, but she has learned over the years bits and pieces, and then, since she's gotten older and able to understand a lot better, she's put things together, and she talks to Michael and Alex a lot as well to help her through problems that she's going through, or something that she's dealing with. And we're very proud of her and how she stood up for them today. She did so well. And then
you know what?
I think you asked about how I have dealt.
Yeah, well, I want to know how you've dealt as well, and I'm going to I want our audience to be able to see your daughter, and I'll do that in a moment. But tell me how you've been coping, Tiffany.
So we have been together for the 30 years now, and for us, when the life sentence was given, it was like, it's going to be 30 years. It's going to be a long time down the road. That's going to be a long time away. We don't have to worry about it. So for 30 years, we haven't had to think about Susan all these years. And then the last 6 months since her parole has come up, it's like, she has been at the front and foremost every day trying to deal with this, and, not wanting her to get out, because to us it would not be justice for Michael and Alex. She took 2 lives, and for her to only serve 30 years would not be enough. But I have just stood by David and, tried to help him through his pain, through the dark times when he didn't want to get out of bed. Just let him sleep it off, or, try to push him out of bed to do things.
But it's better now.
But he's a lot better now, and we just, try to do what we can to get through.
David, today there was mention of the fact that you consider taking your own life, that Susan's actions may have actually led to you taking your life as well, and you battled through that. It's hard to imagine why Susan hasn't made an effort to reach out to you to apologize profoundly, over and over, repeatedly. There was a whisper in the courtroom when she was led away. Today she mentioned, I'm sorry, I know that's not enough. But at the end, when she was asked by the board, is there anything you'd like to add? I thought that's when it would come. I thought she'd say to David, I am so sorry. Instead, she said, I'm a Christian. Did you expect to hear, I'm sorry, today?
No. Susan hasn't been remorseful in my eyes, not one bit, since she's done this. Not one bit have I seen any remorse from her. So I wasn't expecting anything from her.
As painful as having to go through this process is, were you comforted by 400 letters that came in your support? 400 members of the community reaching out to the parole board to ask that Susan be kept behind bars. Did that comfort you in any way, David?
It comforts me now because I'm just now finding that out. So I didn't know there were that many. So yeah, that is very comforting. That is very much very grateful of those people. I appreciate it more than I can put into words.
You know, on the opposite side of the ledger, there were two people there to support Susan, and they weren't her family members, and yet the board said that she'd made arrangements if she were released to stay with her brother. Do you have any contact with Susan's family? Do you know if they have much contact with her other than perhaps this brother?
I have no knowledge of any of that. I don't know why they weren't there. I don't know how much contact they had with Susan. I have no contact with anyone on her side of the family, so I can't speak to any of that.
I want to play, if I can, David and Tiffany, your daughter Savannah, when she spoke to the parole board today. I mean, it must have been a very proud moment for you, especially since she's 23, but let's roll that and take a look.
Primarily, I would just like to focus on, since I came after the fact, what I had stolen from me was two older brothers, the good and the bad of having older siblings. And I now try to use my life as a way to live for them. And growing up, I didn't quite understand it my whole life, but when I finally did, I felt like I had witnessed it, like I was there. The pain that not only was caused to me in like a domino effect, but what I have seen firsthand with my father, my aunt, and our whole hometown.
David,
we can no longer say that we're from Union County without Susan's actions.
The bravery that this took. I wanted to just ask you, as a family, are you all prepared to do this every 2 years going forward?
Absolutely are. We are united. We're going to be there every 2 years.
Well,
Absolutely.
I can't thank you enough for summoning the courage and the energy to speak with us about this. It's important to know what crime does to those who are affected by it, the people who are left behind in the wake, victims' family members, friends, and loved ones. And there's no one who fits that more than you, David Smith. Thank you, and God bless you, and I'm wishing you the most peace and strength as you and your family move forward.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
David and Tiffany Smith joining us live tonight on the program. There was a lot of emotion in that parole hearing today. And sure, I'd cry too if my first chance at walking out of prison in 30 years was slipping through my fingers. But maybe Susan Smith was showing real pain and remorse today, or maybe she wasn't. Maybe she wasn't really crying at all, because we all saw her pretending to cry before when she swore the boys were kidnapped. The man who put her away for murdering those children says he too has seen this act before. You heard him today at Smith's hearing, and he joins me live next. If Susan Smith had a checklist going into her make or break parole hearing, she probably ticked all the boxes. She admitted her crimes, she showed remorse, she dabbed at tears, which may or may not have been there, and she begged for the chance to show that she's a different person. See for yourself.
I know that what I did was horrible. And And I would give anything if I could go back and change it. And I love Michael and Alice with all my heart.
The board was not moved by any of what she said, and nor was Tommy Pope. Tommy was the lead prosecutor in Smith's double murder trial. He was at the lake when Susan Smith's car and her 2 dead little boys were pulled out. Pope also spoke at today's hearing, saying Susan Smith cares about Susan Smith and nothing or nobody else. Pope is now Speaker Pro Tem of the South Carolina House of Representatives. He's kind enough to join me now live. Mr. Pope, thank you so much for being on the program. Did you have any concern, any thought that today she might actually get parole?
We hoped not, but it's kind of like David said, the concern was there's always that possibility. And I can't say enough. You just spent, 10 minutes with David and Tiffany. What you saw today is the David I knew from the day I met him, and the heart that he had for those boys. And I always said selfishly, we didn't have cameras in the courtroom. The judge did not allow it. And I said selfishly, I wanted cameras in the courtroom because I wanted them to see David Smith, because if they saw what you saw today, they would know why we were going forward. What they would also know is that Susan Smith cries when the jury's in the courtroom and giggles when the jury's out of the courtroom. And so the Susan I saw today, really it verified what I've always believed about her.
Well, I listened to your presentation before the parole board today, and I was fascinated by something you said. I don't know how much the public knew this, that the jury back then said to you that they wanted to give her life in prison because it was a harsher sentence than death. They thought that living with what she did for the rest of her natural life after being 24 years old would be a harsher sentence, but that they were not allowed to know that there was a parole opportunity at 30 years. Do you believe they would have chosen death had they known that she could have a parole chance in 30?
The dynamic of a jury is different. It's 12 citizens from all walks of life. This jury was from the Union community, which is a small, close-knit community. But the jury wanted to know whether life meant life. And unfortunately, back then, under the law, it did not. And the judge was required under court rulings to say you take life and death in its plain and usual meaning. In other words, you don't speculate on future parole. So it tells me that was in their minds. Again, whether that would have turned the day, but the jurors saying after the fact, I heard that through the media, some jurors speaking, and they thought that would be a stronger punishment. And like I said today, it could have been if she was truly remorseful and focused on Michael and Alex. But they expected her to spend the rest of her life there, and that's what I wanted to share with the parole board.
Her lawyer spoke and started his presentation by saying this is a mental health story, and went on to sort of chronicle that Susan Smith, all of her childhood, teen years, etc., had struggled with mental health, had been committed. There was stigma, that she tried to take her life, and a few times in prison, the same thing. I covered the Andrea Yates story, a woman who killed her 5 children by drowning them in the bathtub one after the other. Her husband stood by her because of postpartum. They brought up postpartum in this case as well. Do you think things would have been different had Susan been tried for this case today, knowing how important mental health struggles have become in our society?
I think not, because, again, clearly the crime she committed, something was wrong with her to have her wired that she thought it was a good idea to get rid of the boys so she could have the boyfriend, because I truly believe that was her motive in this set of circumstances. And so I think even today we recognize the mental health issues, but Susan was not insane. It was ironic, the state hospital doctor said that she was competent to stand trial, but she was so suicidal, she would ask for death so she couldn't testify, which is not even a diagnosis. So again, clearly something was wrong with Susan. She committed this crime, but it wasn't to the level that mental health would absolved her of the crime.
Tommy Pope, it's great of you to be here. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it.
Still to come, what now? Being a less than model prisoner didn't do Susan Smith any favors, but now she has 2 more years to work on herself. It's still a pretty tough road to hoe. South Carolina barely ever grants parole to violent offenders. But is the alternative plan just to give up and resign herself to dying in prison? She does have options, believe it or not, and constructive ways to fill her very long days in there. And Brian Enton takes a look at some of those next.
South Carolina, I'm outside the building where Susan Smith had her parole hearing today. Obviously an emotional day. What many people didn't realize, though, is that this is not over, sadly. The saga continues because of the way the law was when she was convicted back in 1995. The jury didn't know it when they convicted her to life, but she would be eligible for parole after 30 years. That was the hearing today, but there will be more hearings. She can have another hearing in 2 years. She'll be eligible again. And then she can 2 years after that, and 2 years after that, and 2 years after that. So sadly, this nightmare really is not going to end for quite some time, especially for David Smith and so many of the family members impacted by this tragedy. They'll have to come back again and again and again to testify, which is really a shame for them because it's been emotional. She'll remain behind bars here in South Carolina. Her attorney today tried to make it sound like in many ways she was a good prisoner, that she did Bible study, that she liked to tutor people in math. We, of course, also know she's had a lot of issues in prison with having sex with jail guards and sugar daddies and bringing drugs in prison. All of that came out today. She'll be behind bars at least for 2 more years, and there will be another parole hearing. Ashleigh will be back right after this.